Welcome everybody to another motocross action video. I'm Josh Mosiman and we are in South Carolina getting ready to ride the 2024 Yamaha YZ125X cross-country off-road model and the YZ250X. Yamaha flew us all the way out here to ride these bikes on some off-road conditions.
Back straight.
So the YZ125 and YZ250 two-strokes are some of the most fun bikes in the MXA arsenal. But what's the difference between the X models and the standard motocross bikes? Starting with the YZ125X, this is not a motocross model with an 18-inch rear wheel. Yamaha actually made this into an off-road model. Inside the engine and suspension, this bike is made to be softer, mellower, and better for tight trails like we're going to be riding here in South Carolina. Inside the engine, the combustion chamber was increased. The volume was increased by 7%. Also, compression ratio decreased to smoothen out and broaden out that YZ125 power. Not so snappy, not so hard hitting, a little more mellow. Suspension spring rates are the same as the YZ125. Valving is softer. Of course, it does come with a kickstand, 18-inch rear wheel. It does come with Dunlop MX33 tires, unlike the standard YZ125, which comes with Bridgestone X20s. Handguards, these do not come stock. Yamaha added that for this trip, but other than that, this YZ125 is pretty sweet. Also, carburetor and ignition settings have been updated to make this thing mellower and easier to ride on the tight trails. Like the YZ125X, the YZ250X has a lot of similar updates for this off-road model. Both bikes have O-ring chains, both bikes have kickstands, and both bikes have updates to the power valve to make it smoother. Both bikes also have jetting updates to make it easier to ride and also harder to stall. So those are updates that we appreciate. Not as peaky of power, more rideable and smooth. Also, both bikes have softer suspension valving. The YZ125 stock spring rates. This bike has softer spring rates on the YZ250X in addition to that softer valving. And a big update for this bike, a new wide ratio 5-speed transmission on the YZ250X. Now that differentiates this bike from the YZ125X, makes it even more off-road. First and second gear are standard as the YZ250. Third gear much lower, easier to access. It's like adding a tooth to the rear sprocket on these tight technical trails. Fourth and fifth gear much taller. Fourth gear is like taking tooth teeth away on that rear sprocket, and fifth gear is like taking 5 teeth away on that rear sprocket. It's probably only usable if you're riding down the road like a transfer gear. Either way, I'm excited to compare this YZ250X to the YZ125X right now.
We saw some bikes obviously behind the rig and it's looking pretty wet. This will be the last time you see him looking like this.
Which bike is better? We found out while riding in Union, South Carolina at Randy Hawkins' facility. It's 1,100 acres of tight technical trails, off-road Grand Prix style riding on grass tracks, and even a cool motocross track. It was the perfect place to test the YZ125X and the YZ250X. So what was it like to ride the YZ125X? It was a ton of fun here today. The track was technical though. Single file through these ruts and very, very slippery going through some of the puddles. A couple things I didn't mention at the top of the video. Yamaha went above and beyond on their two strokes to make these set up for off-road riding. Not just an 18-inch rear wheel, they also added a thicker rim. This has got the 2.15 width rim on the rear wheel, and it also has the 50-tooth rear sprocket going up from the 49, which is stock. So that wider rim coupled with the Dunlop MX-33 110 rear tire gives you more traction at the rear wheel. Not as fast for going high speed down motocross tracks, but better for getting traction on the technical stuff here today. Also, on the front of the bike, I wish this bike had a skid plate. Unfortunately, it did not come with that, but decreased compression ratio make this thing a lot easier to lug around the track today. Now with 125s, it takes a lot of skill with the clutch and with the throttle to keep this thing in the meat of its power. It wasn't easy to keep in the meat of the power, but it was easy not to stall it. We had two test riders, myself and Trevor Nelson, both ride this thing. No stalling it today on the track, so that was 2 thumbs up, making it easier to ride compared to the standard YZ125, which would take more effort and more skill not to stall it on these technical trails. As for the 250X, it didn't get as many changes inside of the combustion chamber like the YZ125 did. The YZ250X, the focuses were on the power valve and also the wide ratio transmission. Power valve stays closed longer, giving you more luggability coming out of the corners, and the wide ratio transmission gives you a wider range. Honestly, on the track today, it was easier to ride the YZ250X, but it was more fun to ride the YZ125X. Both Trevor and I are different skill levels. For the YZ125, I was able to hold it in the power easier, and because it's a lot lighter, it's easy to mash in between trees and jump into ruts and jump out of ruts. But with the YZ250X, because of that extra horsepower that it has and the wide ratio transmission, easier to lug out of corners and keep it in the power band. By keeping the power valve closed longer, it's broadening and smoothing out the power, making it more mellow than the motocross bike and easier to ride on the tight technical stuff today. Next, suspension. The YZ125X stock spring rates compared to the motocross model with softer valving. YZ250X, softer spring rates. Both bikes worked great in the off-road technical trails that we had here today. Hop, skipping, and weaving through these ruts. Long ruts today, long and slippery, so soft suspension helps those Dunlop MX-33 tires grab the ground better and just mold to the ruts and mold to the roots that we had here. But softer suspension does hurt you when you get on the motocross track and you try to send it off some jumps. On the YZ250X, I really had to rev it up before landing because I was bottoming out the suspension on the motocross track, but they're not made for motocross, they're made for off-road, and that's what they're great for. So the big question is, which bike was better today, the YZ125X or the YZ250X? Well, it depends on who you are. For me, pro level rider, I actually preferred the YZ125X today, while Trevor Nelson, novice intermediate level rider, he preferred our YZ250X today on these tight technical trails. How come? I like the YZ125 because I have the skill to use the clutch and use the power. It's a much smaller window of power, so it is hard to find that window, but once you access that window, this bike is super light, super easy to ride, and because it's not as fast as the 250X, it's easier to keep between the trees and keep between the lines on these trails today. The ribbons came in tight and the track was slippery, so with the YZ125X, I was able to keep it on the track much easier. The YZ250X, easier to ride, much bigger power window because it obviously has a lot more horsepower, a lot more torque, so it's easier to ride and easier to keep in that two-stroke power band. But because it is fast, it's harder to keep within the trees and harder to keep in between the ribbons here today. So depending on who you are, I say for me, the YZ125X wins, and since I'm narrating this video, I'm gonna say this is the winner of the YZ125X versus 250X shootout, but it's almost a draw. If you're a novice, intermediate level rider, the 250X would be the bike for you. Either way, both bikes were a ton of fun today.
Wow.
So there are a couple things we would do to this YZ125X to make it even easier to ride on these trails today in South Carolina. First one, I would go up at least one more tooth on the rear sprocket. It's a 50 tooth right now. I would go to at least a 51 to get a little more torque coming out of the corners. Next, I would add an FMF pipe and silencer. FMF is known for getting great horsepower and great torque on the bottom end, which would help make this YZ125 much more rideable. And when it comes to the YZ250X, the first mod I would add on that is the GYTR flywheel weight. Now the flywheel actually increases the tractability of the YZ250X, broadens that horsepower even more, and broadens that power window so that it's even easier for me and Trevor to ride on these tight technical trails. Thankfully, Yamaha adds that to their GYTR catalog, making it easy for you to buy and easy to install on your YZ250X. So today was a ton of fun riding the two strokes here in South Carolina. If you haven't seen our YZ450FX video, check that out. That bike is all new for 2024 and we got a full review on our website and YouTube channel. Also, the YZ250FX, now that would have been the best bike here for these tight technical trails. Yamaha didn't bring it out though because it didn't get any updates for 2024. That one will be all new next year. The YZ125X and YZ250X were new in 2023. This is our first time riding them in 2024. We're excited to get them home in California and spend some more time on these two strokes. Thank you guys for watching this video. Also, stay tuned. We're gonna be racing a GNCC here in South Carolina. That video should be a fun one.
This is for my highlight reel.